The July sun beat down on the quiet suburban street, the kind of heat that seemed to drain the color from everything it touched. Mason Reed stood motionless before the two-story house he once called home, his weathered face expressionless as he stared at the darkened windows and overgrown lawn. At 35, the former Navy SEAL carried himself with the straight-back discipline of a military man, though the slight limp in his right leg betrayed the injury that had changed the trajectory of his career years earlier. 730 days. That's how long he had been gone on a classified operation that had pulled him back into service after he thought those days were behind him. No calls home, no letters, just the promise he'd made to his wife Rebecca that he would return. And he had kept that promise. But as Mason pushed open the rusted iron gate, its hinges groaning like a warning, he sensed something was terribly wrong. In the kitchen, dishes still sat in the drying rack, long since dried. Mason moved through each room with the careful precision of a man once trained to clear buildings, though now he was searching for answers rather than threats. In the refrigerator, milk had solidified in its carton. The expiration date faded but still readable. March 2nd of last year. Upstairs, the master bedroom remained partially intact, though Rebecca's closet stood open and half empty. It wasn't the hasty packing of someone fleeing, but the deliberate selection of someone who had time to choose what to take and what to leave behind. Then came Emma's room, painted in the soft lavender color they had chosen together just before his deployment. Her small bed was still made, a stuffed bear missing one ear propped carefully against the pillow. But the drawers were partially emptied, favorite toys missing, with only the forgotten ones left behind. On her bedside table, a framed photo of Mason in his uniform had been placed face down, like a memory too painful to acknowledge. Mason sat on the edge of his daughter's bed, the frame creaking under his weight. 730 days of danger, of focusing on staying alive to make it back to them. And now there was no one to come home to. For the first time since the explosion that had nearly taken his leg 2 years earlier, Mason felt truly lost. A soft knock at the still open front door pulled him from his thoughts. A young woman stood in the doorway, early 20s with loosely curled brown hair, uncertainty written across her face. "I'm sorry, I saw someone come in and—" Her voice trailed off as she took in Mason's appearance, the military short haircut, the rigid posture even in distress. "Wait, are you Mason? Mason Reed?" Mason nodded, rising to his feet with the careful motion of someone whose body remembers pain. "I'm Olivia Palmer. I've been renting the house across the street since April last year." She glanced around the empty house, then back at Mason. "I didn't think anyone was coming back here." "Where are they?" Mason asked, his voice low and rough from disuse. "My wife, my daughter." Olivia bit her lip, her eyes flickering with unease. She glanced over her shoulder as if afraid the wind might carry her words to unwanted ears. "Your wife, Rebecca, right? She left about 18 months ago. I only saw her a few times when I first moved in. She packed up her car one day and that was it." Olivia hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with being the bearer of difficult news. "Your daughter went to stay with Rebecca's sister, Diana, I think, in River Heights, the apartment complex over by the migrant district." Mason's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Emma, my daughter's name is Emma." "Right, Emma." Olivia nodded, a flash of sympathy crossing her face. "Cute kid. I saw her sitting on the front steps a few times, always clutching this one-eared teddy bear. She seemed quiet. Too quiet for a kid, you know." A cold gust swept across the porch, unseasonable for July, carrying with it the scent of impending rain and a hint of something sour, like milk left too long in the sun. Mason didn't move, his eyes narrowed as if trying to grasp something that had just slipped through his fingers. "Do you know why?" he asked, his voice dry, almost a whisper. "Why Rebecca left like that?" Olivia shook her head, genuine regret in her expression. "I wish I could tell you more. She kept to herself, didn't really talk to anyone in the neighborhood. Some folks said she was having money troubles. Others thought she was depressed, but nobody really knew for sure." Mason swallowed hard, the tightness in his throat aching. His chest felt heavy, as though the shards of what had once been his life had rushed back all at once. But this time there was no one left to help pick up the pieces. "Diana," he repeated, the name unfamiliar on his tongue. He had only met Rebecca's sister once at their wedding, where she had stood aloof and clearly disapproving of her sister's choice to marry a military man. You said River Heights, Olivia nodded, relieved to provide some concrete information. Yeah, those apartment buildings by Jefferson Street. I don't know the exact address, but it's that complex with the faded blue trim. Mason thanked her with a nod, his military training kicking in. Compartmentalize the pain, focus on the mission. Find Emma. That was all that mattered now. If you need anything else, Olivia offered as Mason moved toward the door, I'm right across the street. House with the red door. As Mason walked to his truck, a battered Ford F-150 that had sat in storage during his deployment, he pulled out his phone. The screen displayed no service, the contract having lapsed months ago after the automatic payments from his frozen bank account stopped going through. He climbed into the driver's seat, the familiar leather cracked from disuse, and sat motionless for a long moment. The dashboard clock read 3:47 p.m. 2 years ago, at this exact time, he would have been picking Emma up from kindergarten, her small face lighting up at the sight of him, arms outstretched for their daily reunion hug. Now he didn't even know what grade she was in, or if she still liked strawberry ice cream with chocolate sprinkles, or if she'd finally overcome her fear of thunderstorms. The engine reluctantly sputtered to life, and Mason pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the hollow shell of what had once been home. River Heights Apartments stood like a gray monument to urban decay. The three-story complex with its faded blue trim had clearly once aspired to middle-class respectability, but years of neglect had transformed it into the kind of place where dreams came to die slowly. Paint peeled from the exterior walls in long, curling strips. Several windows were patched with cardboard or duct tape. The small patch of grass that might generously be called a lawn was littered with discarded fast food containers and cigarette butts. Mason parked his truck and surveyed the building with the practiced eye of someone who had learned to assess potential threats in hostile territory. Two teenagers lounged on a rusted stairwell, passing something between them that they quickly concealed at the sight of Mason. A woman shouted in Spanish from a second-floor window at children playing too close to the street. The air smelled of cooking grease, garbage, and the distinct sweetness of marijuana. Inside, the hallway was narrow, the floor sticky beneath Mason's boots. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. Several burned out completely, creating pools of shadow every few feet. Mason checked the building directory, a piece of paper behind cracked plastic, many of the names written by hand or simply left as apartment Poitiers. He found it halfway down. D. Sanders, 36B. Rebecca's sister had kept her maiden name after their parents' divorce. Mason climbed the stairs, each step bringing him closer to the daughter he hadn't seen in 2 years. Would she remember him? Would she be angry that he'd been gone so long? Had Rebecca told her why he hadn't come home, or had she invented some story to explain his absence? Apartment 36B was at the end of the hall on the third floor. The corridor was darker here, the bulb above the door having burned out long ago. Mason knocked 3 precise taps. No answer, but he heard something. A faint sound, a soft rustling, like someone shifting position inside. He knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Mason tried the door handle, expecting resistance. To his surprise, it turned easily in his hand. The door swung open into darkness. The apartment was small and cluttered, the air thick with the competing smells of stale cigarettes, cheap perfume, and something rotten from the kitchen. A television blared in the corner, the screen showing only static, its harsh white light the only illumination in the room. Fast food wrappers and empty beer cans littered the coffee table. Discarded clothing lay in piles on the floor. "Hello?" Mason called, his voice low, controlled despite the anxiety building in his chest. "Diana? Emma?" No response, but the rustling sound came again from somewhere near the dining area. Mason moved carefully through the apartment, his military training keeping his footsteps silent despite his size. He rounded the corner into what passed for a dining room, a small table with 3 mismatched chairs, one tipped over on its side. That's when he saw her. Under the dining table, tucked into the shadows beneath the wood, was a tiny head of brown hair. A small body curled into a protective ball, knees drawn up to chest, arms wrapped tightly around a one-eared teddy bear, and a pair of eyes, blue like his own, wide open, unblinking, staring straight at him. "Emma," Mason breathed, her name a prayer on his lips. The little girl didn't answer, just held tighter to her bear, her head tilted ever so slightly as she studied him. She was thin, too thin, her collarbones visible beneath a faded pink t-shirt that was at least one size too small. Her hair, once kept in neat pigtails by Rebecca every morning, hung limply around her face, unwashed and tangled. Mason knelt down, making himself smaller, less intimidating. He didn't come closer, didn't reach for her. 7 years old now, but looking younger in her fragility. "Emma, it's me. It's Dad." His voice broke slightly on the word. "I came back, just like I promised." For a long moment, Emma said nothing, just stared at him with those solemn blue eyes that seemed to hold far too much understanding for a child her age. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, she whispered, "Daddy, did you really come back for me?" Mason nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Emma studied his face carefully, as if committing every line and angle to memory, searching for confirmation that he was real and not some figment of her imagination. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then slowly Emma crawled out from under the table, still clutching her bear. No rush, no tears, just moving toward him with a caution that broke Mason's heart. When she was close enough to touch, she stopped, looking up at him with a mixture of hope and fear that no child should ever have to feel. Mason opened his arms, and Emma stepped into his embrace. The moment her small body pressed against his chest, something shifted in the universe. A wrong being righted, a piece clicking back into place. She smelled of dust and unwashed clothes, but underneath was still the sweet scent he remembered, the one he had carried with him through the darkest moments of his deployment. Emma didn't cry. She didn't say anything else. She just held on to his neck with surprising strength, as if afraid he might disappear if she let go. "Where's Aunt Diana?" Mason asked softly, still holding Emma close. Emma shook her head against his shoulder. "She goes out. I'm supposed to be quiet and not make trouble." Mason looked around the apartment with new eyes, taking in details he had missed in his search for Emma. The empty liquor bottles lined up on the counter, the ashtray overflowing with cigarette butts, the men's boots by the door, too large to belong to Diana, a small blanket and pillow shoved in the corner of the living room. Emma's bed, he realized with a surge of anger. "Have you had anything to eat today?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle. Emma pulled back slightly, her face serious. "There's cereal, but the milk is gone." Mason stood, lifting Emma with him. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, a painful reminder of all he had missed. "Let's get you something to eat, okay? And then we'll figure out what to do next." The kitchen was as neglected as the rest of the apartment. The sink overflowed with unwashed dishes. The refrigerator, when Mason opened it, contained little more than condiments, a six-pack of beer, and a pizza box with one dried-out slice left. The cabinet revealed a box of sugary cereal, nearly empty, and some stale crackers. Mason set Emma down on the counter and found a relatively clean glass, filling it with water from the tap. She drank it all in one long swallow, then looked at him expectantly. "We're going to leave here, Emma. Is there anything you want to take with you? Any clothes or toys?" Emma pointed to the teddy bear she still clutched under one arm. "Just whisper. He helps me be quiet when I'm sad." The simple statement, delivered without self-pity, twisted something in Mason's chest. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and helped Emma down from the counter. "Where are we going?" she asked as Mason led her toward the door. "Somewhere safe," he promised. "But first, I need to make a phone call." Outside, the afternoon had begun to fade, the heat giving way to a cooler evening breeze. Mason stood in the parking lot, Emma's small hand firmly in his, and considered his options. His bank accounts would be frozen until he could sort out the paperwork showing he was very much alive. He had no home to return to, no family nearby to turn to for help. There was only one person he could think of. Mason found a payphone at a gas station 2 blocks away, a rarity in the age of cell phones, but a lifeline now. He dialed a number from memory, one of the few he had committed to heart during his years of service. 3 rings, then a gruff voice answered. "Yeah? Jackson, it's Mason, Mason Reed." A beat of silence, then, "Jesus Christ, Reed, I thought you were dead out there." Jackson Reeves had been a fellow SEAL before an injury forced him into early retirement. He joined the police force afterward, putting his tactical skills to use in civilian life. They'd served on 2 deployments together before their paths diverged, but some bonds transcend time and distance. I need your help, Jackson. I've got my daughter with me and nowhere to go. No questions, no hesitation. Third floor, apartment 3D, doors unlocked. I'll be waiting. Mason hung up, relief washing over him. He knelt down to Emma's level, meeting her solemn gaze. We're going to stay with a friend of mine tonight. His name is Jackson, and he's a good man. You can trust him, okay? Emma nodded, her face serious. Is he a soldier like you? He used to be. Now he helps people in a different way. This seemed to satisfy her. Mason lifted her up, settling her on his hip, and she rested her head on his shoulder as if she'd been doing it every day for the past 2 years. As they walked to the truck, Mason felt the weight of her trust, more precious and more terrifying than any responsibility he'd ever carried. Jackson's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a modest building in a middle-class neighborhood across town. The hallway was clean, the lighting functional, a stark contrast to the squalor of Diana's place. Mason knocked once, then pushed the door open as instructed. The apartment was small but tidy, with the sparse functionality of a man who lived alone and saw his home as little more than a place to sleep. Jackson stood by the dining table, a glass of water in hand, his broad frame still imposing despite the years since they'd served together. At 40, his dark hair had begun to gray at the temples, and lines had deepened around his eyes. But he still carried himself with the alert readiness of a man trained for combat. His eyes went immediately to Emma, an unreadable expression crossing his face. This your little girl? Mason nodded, setting Emma down gently. Emma, this is my friend Jackson. Emma regarded Jackson with the careful assessment of a child who had learned to be wary of adults. After a moment, she offered a small nod of acknowledgement, but stayed close to Mason's side. She looks like you, Jackson observed, his voice softening slightly. Same eyes. It was the closest thing to sentiment Mason had ever heard from the man, and he appreciated the attempt. Jackson wasn't one for emotional displays, but neither was Mason. They understood each other in the way only those who had faced death together could. Hungry kid? Jackson asked, addressing Emma directly. Emma looked up at Mason, seeking permission. When he nodded, she gave a small, yes, sir, that sounded rehearsed, as if she'd been taught to address adults with careful deference. Jackson's expression darkened briefly before he schooled his features back to neutrality. Got some pasta, nothing fancy, but it's hot. While Jackson heated the food, Mason helped Emma wash up in the bathroom. Her small hands were dirty, fingernails rimmed with grime. She submitted to the washing with the quiet compliance of a child used to following orders, which troubled Mason more than outright resistance would have. You can use the bedroom, Jackson said when they returned. Changed the sheets this morning. Kid looks like she could use some real sleep. Emma ate mechanically, taking small, careful bites as if afraid the food might be taken away. Mason watched her, cataloging the changes 2 years had wrought. She was taller, of course, but too thin. Her movements were restrained, lacking the carefree exuberance he remembered. And her eyes, those were the most changed of all. They held a wariness, a guardedness that no 7-year-old should possess. After dinner, Mason tucked Emma into Jackson's bed. She clutched Whisper tightly, her eyes already heavy with exhaustion. Will you be here when I wake up? She asked, the question piercing Mason's heart with its underlying fear. Yes, he promised, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. I'm not going anywhere, Emma. Not ever again. She studied his face as if searching for signs of deception. Whatever she saw must have reassured her, because she nodded and allowed her eyes to close. Within minutes, her breathing deepened into the rhythm of sleep. Mason rejoined Jackson in the living room, accepting the beer offered without a word. They sat in the kind of comfortable silence that comes from shared experience, neither feeling the need to fill the air with unnecessary conversation. Finally, Jackson spoke. Want to tell me what happened? Mason took a long pull from his bottle before answering. Got back this afternoon. House empty. Family gone. Neighbor told me Rebecca left over a year ago. Dumped Emma with her sister. His jaw tightened. You saw the state of her. Malnourished, unwashed, sleeping under a table. Jackson nodded, his expression grim. Diana Sanders. I know the type. Let me guess. More interested in partying than parenting? Seems that way. Mason set the bottle down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. I need to find Rebecca, figure out what the hell happened. But first, I need to make sure Emma's safe, legally mine. You'll need a lawyer, Jackson said, and money. Your accounts are probably frozen. Death benefits might have been paid out already. Mason ran a hand over his face, the weight of the practical challenges ahead momentarily overwhelming. Yeah, one step at a time, I guess. First priority is Emma. Jackson was quiet for a moment, then said, There's something else you should know. Came across a Rebecca Collins on social media last month. Friend of a friend getting married. Looked an awful lot like your Rebecca. Mason's head snapped up. Collins? Maiden name, right? Posted photos with some tech CEO type. Parker, I think. Andrew Parker. Big wedding coming up at Silver Pines Resort. The information hit Mason like a physical blow. Rebecca wasn't just gone. She had erased their life together, taken back her maiden name, and was about to marry someone else, while their daughter slept on the floor of her sister's filthy apartment. She thinks I'm dead, Mason realized aloud. The military would have notified her when I was classified as missing in action. Then when the operation went dark and no body was recovered, he trailed off, the pieces falling into place. She took the opportunity to start over. Jackson leaned back, his expression unreadable. Your status was updated 3 months ago. Military would have sent notification to your last known address, which Rebecca was long gone from. Mason's voice was flat, controlled, but his hands had curled into fists on his knees. So she doesn't know I'm alive. Doesn't know I'm back. Probably not. Mason stood, moving to the window. Outside, the city lights created a patchwork of illumination against the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Rebecca was planning her wedding, her new life, while the old one, the one with him and Emma in it, was being methodically erased. I need to get Emma's teddy bear, Mason said suddenly. She left it at Diana's. She can't sleep without it. Jackson raised an eyebrow but didn't question the non sequitur. Want me to come with you? Mason shook his head. No, stay with Emma in case she wakes up. I'll be quick. In and out. The drive back to River Heights took less time in the evening traffic. Mason parked in the same spot as before, the dilapidated building somehow looking even more depressing in the harsh glow of the security lights. He climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, alert for any signs of Diana's return. The door to 36B was still unlocked. Mason slipped inside, navigating through the cluttered darkness to the dining area where he had found Emma. Kneeling down, he spotted the cream-colored stuffed bunny with one ear worn thin, lying forgotten under the table. Whisper, Emma's constant companion and sole comfort in this place. As he reached for it, a voice came from inside the bedroom, the door now slightly ajar. Diana's voice, caustic and sharp. I told you already, just go ahead with the wedding. That guy doesn't have a clue, and the kid's fine. Keeping her a few more months isn't hurting anyone. Mason froze, listening to the one-sided conversation, Diana apparently on the phone. If it ever comes out, just say the ex-husband died in the war. End of story. A pause, then. Don't be stupid, Rebecca. Who the hell even knows if he's alive? It's been 2 years. Why are you still worrying about this? Another pause. Longer this time. Look, I'm doing you a favor here. You get your fancy new life, your rich husband, and none of the baggage. Just send the money we agreed on, and we're good. Mason stood motionless in the darkness, whisper clutched in his hand. He could confront Diana now, demand answers, but something held him back. If Diana knew he was alive, if she warned Rebecca, no. Better to gather information first, understand the full picture before making his move. Silently, he turned and left the apartment, closing the door as quietly as he had opened it. In the truck, he sat for a long moment, the stuffed bunny on the passenger seat beside him, its single ear seeming to droop in sympathy. It wasn't just that Rebecca had left him. She had abandoned their daughter, treated her like an inconvenience to be hidden away while she pursued a new, unencumbered life. The thought of Emma alone in that apartment, day after day, waiting for someone to come back for her, it was almost more than Mason could bear. Back at Jackson's apartment, he found his friend sitting at the small desk in the corner, his laptop open, a notepad filled with his cramped handwriting beside it. "She's still asleep," Jackson said before Mason could ask. "Kid must have been exhausted." Mason nodded, placing Whisper on the coffee table. "Found something else, too." He recounted the conversation he'd overheard, watching Jackson's expression darken with each detail. "So Rebecca paid her sister to hide the kid while she starts fresh with this Parker guy." Jackson's voice was flat with disgust. "And he has no idea about Emma?" "Doesn't sound like it." Jackson tapped his pen against the notepad. "I did some digging while you were gone. Andrew Parker, CEO of TriStar Technologies, worth about $300 million. Divorced once, no children. Met Rebecca at some charity gala last year." He turned the laptop toward Mason, showing a photo of Rebecca, her hair now blonde instead of its natural brown, on the arm of a distinguished-looking man in his early 40s. "Wedding set for 3 weeks from now." Mason studied the image, searching for some trace of the woman he had married. Rebecca's smile was the same, but there was something different in her eyes, a hardness that hadn't been there before, or perhaps had always been present, but well hidden. "I need to secure Emma legally before I do anything else," Mason said, turning away from the screen. "Rebecca clearly doesn't want her. I'm not going to fight for a marriage that's already dead. But Emma deserves better than being traded off like unwanted baggage." Jackson nodded, closing the laptop. "I've got a contact at CPS. We'll get the ball rolling tomorrow. For now, get some sleep. You look like hell." Mason managed a tired smile, the closest thing to humor he had felt all day. "Thanks for this, Jackson. I mean it." Jackson waved away the gratitude with the discomfort of a man unused to emotional exchanges. "What was I going to do, leave you on the street? We're brothers, Reed. Always will be." Mason checked on Emma one last time before settling on the couch. She was curled on her side, her small hands still clutching an invisible Whisper. Gently, Mason placed the real bunny in her arms. Without waking, she pulled it close, a small eye escaping her lips as her body relaxed deeper into sleep. In the quiet darkness of Jackson's living room, Mason finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of the day's discoveries. The anger, the betrayal, the grief for what had been lost and could never be recovered. But beneath it all, stronger than any other emotion, was a fierce, protective love for the little girl sleeping in the next room. Rebecca had made her choice. She had chosen to leave, to erase their past, to abandon their child. But Mason was back now, and he would never leave Emma again. Whatever it took, whatever battles lay ahead, he would give his daughter the home, the security, the love she deserved. With that resolution firm in his mind, Mason closed his eyes and surrendered to exhaustion, sleeping deeply for the first time in 730 days. Morning light filtered through the blinds, casting striped shadows across the small living room. Mason woke instantly, years of military training having conditioned him to transition from sleep to full alertness in seconds. For a moment, the unfamiliar surroundings disoriented him. Not his barracks, not his house, before the previous day's events came rushing back. He sat up, muscles protesting, after a night on the too-short couch, and checked his watch. 6:17 a.m. Old habits died hard. He hadn't slept past 6:30 in over a decade. The apartment was quiet, Jackson likely still asleep. Mason moved silently to the bedroom door, easing it open just enough to check on Emma. She was still there, still real, curled around Whisper in the center of the bed that dwarfed her small frame. Something tight in Mason's chest loosened at the sight of her, peaceful in sleep in a way she hadn't been awake. In the kitchen, Mason found coffee and filters, setting up the machine with the quiet efficiency of morning ritual. As the coffee brewed, filling the apartment with its rich aroma, he took inventory of their situation. Assets, his truck, about $200 in cash from his final pay that he'd kept on him during the mission. His military ID and other documentation proving he was very much alive. Jackson's friendship and resources. Liabilities. No home. Frozen bank accounts. A traumatized 7-year-old daughter who had been abandoned by her mother and neglected by her aunt. An ex-wife who believed him dead and was about to marry another man. The odds had been worse in combat. The bedroom door creaked open and Emma appeared. Whisper clutched to her chest, her hair tousled from sleep. She stood uncertainly in the doorway, watching Mason with those solemn blue eyes. Good morning, Mason said gently. Did you sleep okay? Emma nodded, then glanced around the apartment as if reorienting herself. You stayed, she observed, her voice small but steady. I told you I would. Emma seemed to consider this, testing the reliability of his word against some internal measure. Whatever calculation she made must have satisfied her, because she padded across the room to stand beside him, close enough that her arm brushed against his leg, a tentative claiming of space in his vicinity. Are you hungry? Mason asked. Another nod, more emphatic this time. Mason opened the refrigerator, surveying the bachelor contents of Jackson's food supply. Eggs, bacon, a half-empty carton of orange juice that was probably still good. How about some breakfast? Real breakfast, not cereal. Emma's eyes widened slightly, perhaps at the prospect of a hot meal, or perhaps at being offered choices. Can I have eggs? Scrambled? Absolutely. Mason retrieved the carton, pleased to find it nearly full. Want to help? A small smile flickered across Emma's face, the first Mason had seen since his return, and she nodded. He pulled a chair from the dining table to the counter, helping Emma climb up so she could watch the process. First, we crack the eggs, Mason explained, demonstrating with one before handing another to Emma. Her small fingers worked carefully, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration as she tapped the egg against the bowl's edge. The shell cracked unevenly, bits falling into the mixture, but Mason praised her effort nonetheless. Perfect. Now we whisk them together. He handed her a fork, guiding her hand in the circular motion needed to beat the eggs. As they worked, the tension gradually left Emma's shoulders, her movements becoming more natural, less guarded. By the time Jackson emerged from the spare room he used as an office, yawning and drawn by the smell of coffee and bacon, Emma was perched on her chair with a plate of slightly overcooked eggs, taking small but eager bites. Morning, Jackson grunted, making a beeline for the coffee pot. He poured a mug, gulped half of it black, then seemed to notice Emma watching him with interest. Food good, kid? Emma nodded, solemn again in the presence of this new adult. You sleep okay on that old mattress? Jackson asked, his gruff voice softening slightly. Yes, sir, Emma replied automatically, then added in a quieter voice. It was soft. Something flickered across Jackson's face, recognition, perhaps, of what that simple statement implied about Emma's recent sleeping arrangements. He masked it quickly, but Mason caught it and felt a fresh surge of anger toward Diana, and by extension, Rebecca. Once breakfast was cleared away, Mason sat Emma down in the living room with some paper and colored pencils Jackson had unearthed from a drawer. I need to talk to Mr. Jackson about some grown-up things, he explained. Will you be okay drawing for a little while? Emma nodded, already selecting a blue pencil with careful deliberation. Mason watched her for a moment, struck by how different she was from the exuberant 5-year-old he remembered. That Emma had chattered constantly, asked endless questions, laughed at the slightest provocation. This Emma was contained, cautious, as if she had learned that taking up too much space or making too much noise was dangerous. In the kitchen, Jackson had spread several papers across the table, including printouts of legal documents and social media profiles. So here's where we stand, he said, keeping his voice low. Rebecca has been using her maiden name Collins for at least a year. She's engaged to Andrew Parker, CEO of TriStar Technologies, wedding set for July 30th at Silver Pines Resort. Mason nodded, processing the information with the detachment he had cultivated during missions. And Emma, what's her legal status? Jackson's expression darkened. That's where it gets interesting. I called in a favor with a buddy at the county records office. Emma's birth certificate has been amended. He slid a document across the table. Look at the father's name. Mason stared at the official-looking paper. Where his name should have been was a stark line with unknown typed neatly beside it. How is this possible? He asked, his voice deadly quiet. I signed the original birth certificate. I was there when Emma was born. There's a process called a voluntary maternal declaration, Jackson explained, usually used when paternity is genuinely uncertain or when the father has abandoned the family. But it requires evidence, witnesses, sometimes a court order. He tapped the document. This was pushed through with minimal oversight. Someone cut corners. Mason's jaw tightened as the implications became clear. Rebecca hadn't just left him. She had legally erased him from Emma's life, as if he had never existed. We need to go back to the house, Mason decided. Find the original birth certificate, our marriage license, anything that proves I'm Emma's father. Jackson nodded. Already on it. My contact is pulling the original records, but having physical copies will strengthen your case. He hesitated, then added, there's something else you should know. I checked Diana's record. 3 DUIs in the past year, a domestic disturbance call at her apartment 2 months ago. She's not fit to have custody of a child, and any half-decent CPS worker would see that immediately. So why hasn't anyone intervened? My guess, no one knew Emma was there. No school records in River Heights for the past year. No doctor visits. It's like the kid just disappeared from the system. The revelation sent a chill through Mason. Emma had been effectively erased along with him, hidden away while Rebecca constructed her new life, a life with no room for a daughter or the memories she represented. I need to get her to a doctor, Mason said. Document her condition. Get her checked out properly. Already scheduled, Jackson replied. Dr. Taylor, 2 p.m. today. She's discreet, thorough, and she'll provide documentation we can use if needed. He pulled out another document. And I've set up a meeting with Elizabeth Chen, best family law attorney in the city. She's agreed to see you tomorrow morning. Mason looked at his friend with genuine gratitude. You've been busy. Jackson shrugged, uncomfortable with the acknowledgement. Made some calls, that's all. Figure you've got enough on your plate. He glanced toward the living room where Emma was still drawing, her small head bent in concentration. She deserves better than what she got. Both of you do. Mason nodded, unable to express the depth of his appreciation. Instead, he turned his attention to the task at hand. Let's make a plan for today. House first, doctor second, then regroup and figure out next steps. As they mapped out the day's agenda, Mason kept one eye on Emma, watching as she carefully selected colors, her movements deliberate and precise. There was so much to do, so many battles ahead, but for the first time since his return, he felt something like hope stirring beneath the anger and confusion. Whatever Rebecca had done, whatever her reasons, Emma was here now, safe, with him, and Mason would move heaven and earth to ensure she stayed that way. By mid-morning, Mason and Emma returned to the house he had once called home. The place looked different in daylight, less like a ghost and more like an abandoned shell waiting to be reclaimed. Emma held his hand tightly as they walked up the cracked path to the front door, her steps slowing as they approached. This was our house, Mason explained gently, watching her face for signs of recognition. We lived here before I went away. Emma looked up at the 2-story structure, her expression thoughtful. I remember the yellow kitchen, she said after a moment, and the tree with the swing. Mason nodded, encouraged by even this small recollection. That's right, the oak tree was in the backyard. I built that swing for your 5th birthday. The interior was just as he'd left it yesterday, dusty and frozen in time. Mason moved methodically through each room, searching for the documents they needed while Emma trailed behind him. Whisper clutched to her chest, rediscovering the space that had once been hers. In the home office, Mason found a locked filing cabinet that had survived Rebecca's purge. The key was still hidden in the false bottom of the desk drawer, another small domestic secret untouched by time. Inside were the crucial documents. Their marriage certificate, Emma's original birth certificate, with his name clearly listed as father, his military service records, and the deed to the house, jointly owned by both of them. Rebecca never legally sold this place, Mason realized aloud, examining the deed. She just left. As Mason continued his search, the doorbell rang, startling both of them. Emma instinctively moved closer to him, her body tensing. It's okay, Mason assured her, though his own instincts had shifted to high alert. Let's see who it is. At the door stood an older woman, small in stature with silver hair neatly tucked into a bun. She held a cloth tote bag filled with children's books, her expression shifting from neutral to shocked as she recognized Mason. Mr. Reed? Mason Reed? Her voice wavered slightly. I didn't expect to see you here. Mrs. Henderson, Mason replied, placing the name with the face after a moment's hesitation. Emma's kindergarten teacher who had always stayed late on parent-teacher nights to accommodate his military schedule. Mrs. Henderson's gaze moved past him to Emma, who partially hid behind Mason's leg, peering out cautiously. Emma? Oh my goodness, look how you've grown. Mason invited her in, grateful for the unexpected connection to Emma's past. As they sat in the dusty living room, Mrs. Henderson explained her presence. I've been trying to return these books Emma borrowed before everything changed. She placed the bag on the coffee table. I came by a few times last year, but no one was ever home. I was about to donate them to the school library, but thought I'd try once more. While Emma cautiously examined the forgotten books, Mrs. Henderson lowered her voice. I didn't know you were back, Mr. Reed. When Emma stopped coming to school, her mother's sister said the family had moved away. Her expression turned troubled. But then I saw Emma waiting outside River Heights Elementary several months later. All alone, no one picking her up. Mason's jaw tightened. What happened? I called the guardian, Ms. Sanders, I believe. She said she'd forgotten that she was working a double shift. Mrs. Henderson's disapproval was evident in her tone. I waited with Emma for over an hour and a half. The child just sat there under a tree, hugging that teddy bear. Never complained, never cried, just waited, like she was used to it. The image struck Mason like a physical blow. Emma, silent and patient, waiting for someone who wouldn't come. It mirrored too closely his own return to an empty house. I sent letters, Mrs. Henderson continued, reaching into her bag. To your old address, though I suspected they weren't being received. She handed Mason a small folder. These are copies, records of Emma's attendance, notes about concerns I had, a photo from her last day at school. Mason opened the folder, his eyes landing on a photograph of Emma wearing a paper crown, standing beside a small cupcake with a candle. Her classmates surrounded her, but even then there was a distance in her eyes, as if she were already retreating inward. Thank you, Mason said, his voice rough with emotion, for looking out for her, for keeping these records. Mrs. Henderson nodded, her kind eyes moving between Mason and Emma. I always knew something wasn't right. Emma was such a bright, engaged child when you were home, Mr. Reed. Then after you deployed and her mother, she trailed off, aware of the small ears listening. Well, I'm just glad you're back now. After Mrs. Henderson left, promising to visit again soon, Mason continued his search with renewed purpose. In the master bedroom, hidden in the shoebox at the back of the closet, he found something unexpected. A thick envelope labeled Notarized Copy, Custody Agreement. Inside was a legal document bearing the signatures of Rebecca and a man named Alden Wright, an attorney specializing in family law. The agreement granted temporary guardianship of Emma to Diana Sanders, Rebecca's sister, dated 7 months after Mason's deployment. She waited until she was sure I wasn't coming back, Mason murmured, the betrayal a fresh wound. Beneath the guardianship papers was another document, a petition for amendment of birth records, with Rebecca's statement claiming the father was unknown. The petition had been granted, signed by County Registrar Shelley Brown. This isn't legal, Mason said to himself, examining the document closely. You can't just erase a father's name without a court order or death certificate. Jackson, who had joined them after completing his morning shift, leaned over Mason's shoulder to examine the document. She used a loophole. This voluntary maternal declaration is meant for cases where paternity was never established, but it requires evidence, testimony. Someone cut corners here. Mason looked over at Emma, who sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully turning the pages of a picture book Mrs. Henderson had returned. In the eyes of the law, Mason Reed was no longer her father. The thought was intolerable. We need to talk to this county registrar, Mason decided, tucking the documents into a folder. Today, at the county records office, Shelley Brown was exactly what Mason expected. A middle-aged bureaucrat with tired eyes and the defensive posture of someone accustomed to being the bearer of bad news. Her small office was crowded with filing cabinets, the fluorescent lighting harsh against the beige walls. I can't discuss this over the phone, she said briskly after Jackson made the introductions, her eyes darting between the two men. If you'd like to request information about vital records, you'll need to submit a formal application with proper identification. Mason placed his military ID and the original birth certificate on her desk. I'm not requesting information, Ms. Brown. I'm asking why my name was removed from my daughter's birth certificate without my knowledge or consent. Shelley's expression shifted subtly. Recognition, followed quickly by unease. Mr. Reed, I'm not at liberty to— Mason Reed, he interrupted, his voice level but firm. The father you helped erase from official records. I was deployed, not dead, and certainly not unknown. Shelley glanced toward the door, as if calculating an escape route. Jackson, reading her body language, shifted slightly to block the exit without appearing threatening. Look, Shelley said, lowering her voice. I just processed the paperwork that comes across my desk. If there was an irregularity with the filing, there was more than an irregularity, Mason cut in. There was fraud. My wife claimed I was an unknown father while I was serving my country on a classified mission. She used that claim to legally separate me from my daughter, and you signed off on it. Shelley's face paled. She had an attorney with her. The paperwork seemed in order. They said you had abandoned the family, that there had been no contact for over a year. Because I was deployed, Mason emphasized, struggling to maintain his composure. Something that could have been verified with a single phone call to the military. Shelley looked genuinely uncomfortable now. Mr. Reed, I process hundreds of forms every month. I can't verify every claim. But you're required to, Jackson interjected, his voice carrying the authority of his police background. State law requires substantiating evidence for paternity challenges, especially when removing an established father from a birth certificate. The room fell silent as Shelley absorbed the implicit threat in Jackson's words, that her failure to follow proper procedure could have professional consequences. What do you want from me? She finally asked. The truth, Mason replied, and copies of every document related to this case, including any notes, emails, or records of who was present during the filing. Shelley hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. It will take some time to gather everything. We'll wait, Jackson said, settling more comfortably into his chair to emphasize the point. An hour later, they left the records office with a thick folder of documentation, evidence of Rebecca's systematic effort to erase Mason from Emma's official existence. The pattern was clear. Shortly after Mason was declared missing in action, Rebecca had begun the process of reinventing herself, starting with severing all legal ties between Mason and Emma. She planned this, Mason said as they walked to the car, his voice tight with controlled anger. Used my deployment as an opportunity to start over, to pretend Emma and I never existed. Jackson nodded grimly. The question is why? What was so terrible about her life with you that she needed to erase it completely? Mason had no answer, only a hollow feeling in his chest where certainty about his marriage had once resided. That afternoon, they took Emma to see Dr. Grace Taylor, a pediatrician who had treated Jackson's nephew and could be trusted to be thorough and discreet. The doctor's office was bright and cheerful, decorated with colorful animal murals designed to put young patients at ease. Emma sat silently on the examination table, her small legs dangling over the edge, watching Dr. Taylor with wary eyes as the physician gently checked her height, weight, and vital signs. Mason stood nearby, close enough for Emma to see him, but giving the doctor space to work. She's underweight for her age, Dr. Taylor noted, making entries in her chart, and showing signs of mild malnutrition, dry skin, brittle hair, minor vitamin deficiencies. Mason nodded, having suspected as much from Emma's appearance. What about her overall health? Taylor continued her examination, speaking directly to Emma as she checked her ears, throat, and reflexes, explaining each step with patient clarity. Emma responded to questions with nods or single-word answers, her body gradually relaxing as the doctor's gentle manner earned her trust. Physically, she's resilient, Dr. Taylor said once the examination was complete. Children often are. The nutritional issues can be addressed with a proper diet and supplements. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully with Emma still present. However, I'm concerned about signs of emotional stress, selective mutism, hypervigilance, difficulty making eye contact. These can be indicators of trauma or neglect. Mason's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral for Emma's sake. Recommendations? Consistency, security, patience, Dr. Taylor replied, and possibly therapy once she's had time to adjust to being with you again. Children are remarkably adaptable, Mr. Reed. With proper support, they can overcome significant hardship. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Taylor handed Mason a sealed envelope. My complete assessment and documentation of Emma's condition, she explained quietly. It may be useful if there are legal questions about her care. Mason thanked her, tucking the envelope into his jacket pocket, another piece of evidence in the case he was building, not just to reclaim his legal rights as Emma's father, but to ensure Rebecca could never again treat their daughter as an inconvenience to be hidden away. Outside the doctor's office, Mason knelt to Emma's level. "You did great in there, Emma. Dr. Taylor just wants to help you feel better." Emma nodded solemnly. She was nice, not scary like the other doctor. Mason frowned. "What other doctor, sweetheart?" Emma's gaze dropped to her shoes. "The one Aunt Diana took me to when I got sick. He gave me medicine that made me sleepy all the time." A cold feeling settled in Mason's stomach. "Do you remember the doctor's name? Or what the medicine was for?" Emma shook her head. "It was for being too loud. Aunt Diana said I asked too many questions." The implication was clear and horrifying. Diana had medicated Emma to keep her quiet and compliant. Mason forced himself to maintain a calm exterior despite the rage building inside him. "You can ask me as many questions as you want, Emma, always. I promise I'll answer them all." The small smile that flickered across Emma's face was like sunshine breaking through clouds, brief but brilliant. That evening, Mason agreed to meet with Diana at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop several blocks from Jackson's apartment. Emma remained with Jackson, engaged in drawing with new art supplies they had purchased on the way home from the doctor's office. Diana arrived 20 minutes late, her artificially red-haired disheveled, wearing a tight dress more appropriate for a nightclub than a coffee meeting. At 38, she showed the signs of hard living, premature lines around her eyes, skin damaged by sun and cigarettes, a nervous energy that suggested chemical enhancement. "Didn't expect to see you again," she said by way of greeting, sliding into the booth across from Mason. "Though I guess I shouldn't be surprised. Military types are always so persistent." Mason regarded her with the detached assessment he had once used to evaluate potential threats in combat zones. "Where's Emma's medication?" Diana blinked, taken aback by the direct question. "What?" "The medication you gave her, for being too loud. I want to know what it was and who prescribed it." Diana's expression shifted from surprise to defensive anger. "Look, the kid had behavioral issues. She was constantly whining about wanting her mom, asking though when you were coming home. I couldn't deal with it 24/7. "So you drugged her." Mason's voice was dangerously quiet. "I took her to a doctor," Diana countered, though her eyes slid away from his. "He said she had anxiety, prescribed something to calm her down. It's not like I was giving her street drugs." "The name of the doctor, now." Diana must have recognized the steel beneath Mason's controlled tone because she fumbled in her purse and produced a crumpled business card. "Dr. Mercer, look, he's legitimate, has an office and everything." Mason pocketed the card without looking at it, making a mental note to have Jackson investigate the physician. "Why did Rebecca leave Emma with you?" Diana snorted, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "Because she wanted her new life unencumbered, obviously. No baby daddy drama, no kid to explain to her rich new boyfriend. And you agreed to hide Emma away, to pretend she didn't exist." "For a price," Diana shrugged, unashamed. "Rebecca paid the rent, sent money for food and clothes. Not my fault if the kid was picky about eating." Mason felt a surge of disgust so powerful it nearly choked him. "Did you know I was alive? That I was coming back?" Something flickered in Diana's eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or simply the recognition that she had miscalculated. Rebecca got some notification a few months ago. Military stuff. She ignored it, figured it was just paperwork, death benefits, or something. "So you both knew there was a possibility I was alive, and you still kept Emma hidden." Diana shifted uncomfortably. "Look, it wasn't my idea, okay? Rebecca had this whole plan. New name, new look, new life. The kid didn't fit into that picture, and she paid me good money to keep things quiet until after the wedding." "Why after the wedding?" "Once she married Parker, she figured it wouldn't matter anymore. He'd be so in love with her that finding out about a kid from a previous marriage would be a bump, not a roadblock." Diana leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Besides, she's been dropping hints about wanting to start a family with him. A fresh start, no baggage." The casual cruelty of it, referring to Emma as baggage, planning to replace her with new children, struck Mason like a physical blow. For a moment, he said nothing, focusing on controlling his breathing, on not showing Diana just how deeply her words had affected him. "Emma won't be going back to your apartment," he finally said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "She's with me now, where she belongs." Diana shrugged again, seemingly unbothered. "Fine by me. Kid was a drag anyway, but Rebecca's not going to like it. Rebecca gave up any right to an opinion when she abandoned her daughter." Mason stood, leaving enough money on the table to cover Diana's untouched coffee. "One more thing. I'm recording this conversation." He placed his phone on the table, the screen showing an active recording. Diana's eyes widened. "What the hell?" "Insurance," Mason explained calmly, "in case anyone tries to dispute Emma's living conditions or your role in hiding her from me." Diana's face contorted with anger. "You can't do that. That's legal in this state. As long as one party consents. I consent." Mason picked up the phone, stopping the recording. "I suggest you think carefully before making any more arrangements with Rebecca. Conspiracy to commit fraud, child endangerment, unauthorized administration of prescription medication to a minor. These are serious charges, Diana." He left her sitting there, face pale beneath her makeup, the threat hanging in the air between them. Back at Jackson's apartment, Mason found Emma and his friend sitting at the kitchen table, engaged in a serious game of Go Fish. Emma's face lit up when she saw Mason, a flash of genuine happiness that made the confrontation with Diana worth every difficult moment. "Daddy, I'm winning!" The simple declaration, and the first time she had called him Daddy since his return, filled Mason with a warmth that pushed back against the cold anger of the past hours. "That's great, sweetheart. Mr. Jackson is pretty tough to beat." Jackson feigned outrage. "She's hustling me, Reed. Kid's a card shark." Emma giggled, too. Another first, and the sound was like music. A reminder of the child she had been before abandonment and neglect had forced her to build walls around her heart. Later that night, after Emma had fallen asleep, Mason shared what he had learned from Diana with Jackson. The recording, combined with the medical documentation from Dr. Taylor and the evidence of record tampering from the county office, painted a damning picture of Rebecca's actions. "We need to move on this quickly," Jackson advised. "Before the wedding, before she has time to create counter-narratives or get Parker's resources behind her." Mason nodded, his resolve hardening. "I'm meeting with the lawyer tomorrow." "Elizabeth Chen, you said?" "Best family attorney in the city. Expensive, but worth every penny, and she hates deadbeat parents with a passion." Jackson hesitated, then added, "What's your end goal here, Reed? Full custody, obviously, but what about Rebecca? You want her completely out of Emma's life?" Mason considered the question carefully. "I want what's best for Emma. Right now, that means stability, security, and knowing she won't be abandoned again." He rubbed a hand across his face, suddenly weary. "I'm not looking for revenge, Jackson. I just want my daughter back. Legally, officially. What happens with Rebecca? That's secondary." Jackson studied his friend for a long moment. "You're a better man than most would be in your shoes." Mason shook his head. "Not better, just focused on the mission. And right now, the mission is Emma." The next morning, Mason met with Elizabeth Chen in her downtown office. At 45, Chen had the confident bearing of someone used to winning difficult battles. Her office was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and walls adorned with diplomas and professional accolades. "I've reviewed the documents you sent over," Chen began, gesturing for Mason to take a seat across from her desk. "Birth certificate alteration, fraudulent guardianship transfer, evidence of neglect." Her expression was professionally neutral, but her eyes held a hint of anger. "This is one of the more egregious cases I've seen, Mr. Reed." Mason nodded, having expected as much. "What are our options?" Chen leaned forward, fingers steepled. "Ordinarily, custody disputes are complex, with courts favoring shared arrangements. But this isn't ordinary. Your wife didn't just leave. She systematically erased you from your daughter's legal existence while you were serving your country, then abandoned the child to an unfit guardian." She opened a folder on her desk, scanning its contents. The medical report from Dr. Taylor documents clear signs of neglect. The recorded conversation with Dinah Sanders provides evidence of conspiracy and potential child endangerment, and the county records office has already initiated an internal investigation into the irregular processing of the birth certificate amendment. So we have a strong case. More than strong, Chen confirmed. I've already drafted an emergency petition for sole physical and legal custody, along with a motion to restore your parental rights and invalidate the birth certificate amendment. She slid the documents across the desk for Mason to review. Once filed, we can request an expedited hearing given the circumstances. Mason skimmed the legal language, focusing on the core requests. How quickly can this move forward? I can file today. Given the evidence of potential endangerment, we could have a temporary order as soon as tomorrow. Chen's expression softened slightly. Your daughter has been through enough, Mr. Reed. The courts generally recognize that stability and security are paramount in cases like these. And Rebecca, what should I expect from her? Chen's gaze sharpened. Once served with the petition, she has several options. She could contest it, though that would be difficult given the evidence. She could attempt to negotiate a settlement, or she could simply accept the petition's terms. She won't accept, Mason said with certainty. Not after everything she's done to erase me. Then we prepare for battle, Chen replied simply. And based on what I've seen, it's a battle she's unlikely to win. As Mason left Chen's office, signed documents in hand, he felt a curious mixture of resolve and sadness. This wasn't how he had imagined his homecoming. Legal petitions and custody battles, the dismantling of what had once been a family. But then nothing had gone as imagined since his return. His phone buzzed with a text from Jackson. Storage facility on Westfield Ave. Rebecca's name on a unit. Worth checking out? Mason texted back immediately. On my way. River Storage was a sprawling complex of low-metal buildings divided into individual units, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. The attendant at the front office, a bored-looking young man more interested in his phone than his job, barely glanced at the paperwork Mason presented. Military ID and marriage certificate showing joint ownership of assets with Rebecca. Unit 247, Building C, the attendant said, handing over a temporary access card. We close at 6. Mason found the unit easily, a standard 10x10 storage space with a rolling metal door secured by a padlock. The marriage certificate had listed Rebecca's birth date as the 4-digit code for all their shared accounts, a system they had used for convenience. Mason entered the numbers on the electronic keypad beside the padlock, not really expecting it to work. To his surprise, the lock clicked open. Inside, the unit was meticulously organized, so unlike the chaotic apartment Diana had kept Emma in. Boxes were stacked neatly against the walls, each labeled in Rebecca's precise handwriting. Kitchen, bedroom, books. But it was the section labeled Emma that drew Mason's attention immediately. Unlike the other areas, which contained practical household items, Emma's section was a shrine to a discarded life. Her baby clothes carefully folded and preserved in clear plastic containers. Photo albums chronicling her first steps, first words, first day of preschool. The stuffed animals she had outgrown but had been too attached to throw away. A collection of artwork from her early school days, each drawing carefully dated and preserved. In the center of it all was a pink plastic bin labeled Emma, important. Mason opened it to find Emma's medical records, immunization history, even the hospital bracelet from the day she was born. Beneath these was a white envelope addressed simply Emma in Rebecca's handwriting. Mason hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a birthday card with a picture of a bunny on the front. The message inside read, "To my dearest Emma, on your 6th birthday, Mommy loves you so much and misses you every day. I'll come back for you soon, I promise." It was signed, "All my love, Mommy," with a row of X's and O's. The card had never been sent. Beside the bin of documents was something that made Mason's breath catch. A small recordable device, the kind used for children's books, where parents could record themselves reading the story. A label on the back read, "For Emma, bedtime." Mason pressed play and Rebecca's voice filled the small storage unit. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who was the bravest, smartest, most wonderful daughter in the whole world. And though sometimes she had to be away from her mommy, she was never, ever alone. Neiman, the recording continued, Rebecca reading a story about a mother's love transcending distance, her voice warm and gentle, the voice of a mother who cherished her child. Mason listened to the entire recording, trying to reconcile this loving maternal figure with the woman who had abandoned Emma to Diana's neglectful care. At the very back of the unit, partially hidden behind a stack of boxes, Mason found something unexpected, a small fireproof safe. This lock required a key, which was nowhere to be found. Mason examined it carefully, noting the brand and model number, before taking a photo to show Jackson. As he prepared to leave, Mason gathered the most important items: Emma's medical records, school documentation, and a few of the photo albums she might want to see. The birthday card he left untouched, uncertain whether it would bring comfort or fresh pain to his daughter. The last item he took was the voice recorder. Whatever Rebecca's true feelings about Emma, the recording might provide some comfort to a child who still occasionally asked when her mother was coming back. Back in the truck, Mason sat for a long moment, processing what he had found. The storage unit told a different story than Diana's apartment, one of careful preservation rather than careless abandonment. It suggested that Rebecca hadn't simply discarded her life with Mason and Emma. She had packed it away, separated it from her new existence, but kept it intact. The contradiction troubled him deeply. If Rebecca cared enough to preserve these memories, these artifacts of Emma's life, why had she left their daughter in such neglectful conditions? What could possibly justify that choice? As he started the engine, Mason's phone buzzed with another text from Jackson. Found something big. Old phone of Rebecca's in evidence locker from Diana's DUI last year. Need to hear what's on it. Mason's grip tightened on the steering wheel. The pieces were coming together, a picture forming of Rebecca's choices and their consequences. But the most important piece, the why behind it all, remained elusive. By the time Mason returned to Jackson's apartment, Emma had awakened from her nap and was helping Jackson prepare a simple dinner. The domestic scene, Emma carefully setting plates on the table, her small face serious with concentration, created a momentary illusion of normalcy that Mason was reluctant to disrupt. We're having spaghetti, Emma announced when she saw him, her voice stronger and more confident than it had been since his return. I helped stir the sauce. It smells amazing, Mason replied, setting down the items from the storage unit and crouching to give Emma a hug. She returned it without hesitation, another small victory in rebuilding their bond. Over dinner, Emma chatted more freely than before, telling Mason about the pictures she had drawn that afternoon and how Jackson had taught her to play checkers. The change in her was remarkable, like watching a flower slowly unfurl after a long winter, cautiously reaching toward the sun. After Emma was settled in bed with Whisper and a story, Mason and Jackson sat at the kitchen table, examining the items recovered from Rebecca's storage unit and discussing the implications. The safe is a Sentinel Pro 4, Jackson said, studying the photo Mason had taken. High-end, fire and water resistant. Could be opened with the right tools, but not without damaging it. What about the phone? Mason asked. Jackson pulled an evidence bag from his jacket pocket, containing an older model iPhone. Diana was pulled over for DUI last November. This was in her purse, deactivated but still holding a charge. Evidence techs logged it, but since it wasn't relevant to the DUI charge, it just sat in storage. He removed the phone from the bag. Technically, this is still evidence in an open case, so I can't officially check it out. But I've got a buddy in evidence who let me examine it on site. And? It's Rebecca's old phone, all right, password protected, but I tried your wedding anniversary on a hunch, and it opened right up. Jackson's expression darkened. There's a voice memo from about 18 months ago, right around when Rebecca left. It's a conversation between her and Diana. He placed the phone on the table between them and pressed play. Rebecca's voice, tense and defensive, filled the space between them. I can't do this anymore, Diana. I can't be a mother, a wife, any of it. Every time I look at Emma, I see him. I see the life I'm trapped in. Diana's voice responded, the familiar harsh tone unmistakable. So what's your plan? Just walk away from everything? I need a fresh start, Rebecca continued. This life with Mason, it was a mistake from the beginning. We were too young, too different. I deserve more than living paycheck to paycheck, worrying every day if he's coming home in a body bag. I deserve a chance at happiness. And what about the kid? You just going to abandon her? A pause, then Rebecca's voice again, softer but resolute. I need you to take her, just for a while until I'm settled. I'll send money for expenses. And if Mason comes back, what then? Another pause, longer this time. He won't. The military said he's missing in action, presumed dead. It's been months with no word. I can't, I can't keep waiting for a ghost. The recording ended, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Mason stared at the phone, the final piece of the puzzle now in place. Rebecca hadn't just left because she wanted a different life. She had left believing he was never coming back, using his presumed death as an opportunity to escape a life she had grown to resent. There's more, Jackson said quietly. Another recording from a few months later, after she met Parker. He played the second clip, this one shorter, but even more damning. Rebecca's voice had changed subtly, more confident, more polished. He can never know about Emma, Diana. Andrew comes from old money, old values. He wants a traditional family, a fresh start. If he finds out I have a child from a previous marriage, Diana's voice cut in, so the kid just disappears? Like she never existed? Not forever, Rebecca insisted. Just until after the wedding. Once we're married, once I'm secure, then maybe, maybe I can find a way to introduce her. As a niece, maybe. A distant relative who needs a home. Jesus, Becca, that's cold even for you. I'm not asking for your approval, Di. I'm asking for your help. Keep Emma a little longer. I'll double the monthly payment. After the wedding, we'll figure something out. The recording ended, leaving Mason staring at the phone in disbelief. Rebecca had not only abandoned Emma, she had planned to reintroduce her with a false identity, erasing their true relationship just as she had erased Mason from the birth certificate. She was going to deny her own daughter, Mason said, his voice hollow with shock. Make her pretend to be someone else, just to fit into her new life. Jackson nodded grimly. These recordings, combined with everything else we've found, it's more than enough to secure full custody and potentially pursue charges for fraud and child endangerment. Mason rubbed his temples, suddenly exhausted. I don't want to destroy her, Jackson. I just want to protect Emma. Sometimes those are the same thing, Jackson replied quietly. Later that night, unable to sleep, Mason stood in the doorway of the bedroom, watching Emma's peaceful form under the blankets. In sleep, her face relaxed. She looked more like the child he remembered, innocent, unburdened by the betrayals and abandonments that had shaped her young life. The anger he felt toward Rebecca was tempered now by something more complex, a sadness for what might have been, for the family they had once dreamed of building together. But beneath that sadness was an unwavering resolve. Whatever Rebecca's reasons, whatever her plans, she had forfeited her right to determine Emma's future when she had chosen to deny her very existence. Tomorrow, Mason would meet again with Elizabeth Chen, adding the recordings and storage unit discoveries to their growing case. The legal machinery would begin moving in earnest, setting in motion a confrontation that could no longer be avoided. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of Jackson's apartment, with Emma safe and beginning to heal, Mason allowed himself a moment of peace. He had found his daughter. He was rebuilding their bond day by day, moment by moment. That was enough for now. The rest would come in its own time. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting golden stripes across Emma's sleeping face. Mason stood in the doorway, coffee mug in hand, watching the gentle rise and fall of his daughter's chest. Each peaceful moment felt like a small victory, a step away from the trauma of the past 18 months. Today would bring another meeting with Elizabeth Chen, another piece in the legal puzzle they were assembling. But for now, in this quiet morning light, Mason allowed himself to simply be a father watching over his child. Emma stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment, confusion clouded her features, the disorientation of waking in an unfamiliar place, before recognition dawned. "Daddy?" she murmured, voice thick with sleep. "I'm here, sweetheart." Mason moved to sit on the edge of the bed. "Did you sleep okay?" Emma nodded, sitting up and reaching automatically for whisper. "No bad dreams." Another victory, small but significant. The first few nights, Emma had woken crying, disoriented and afraid. Mason had sat with her each time, a steady presence until she drifted back to sleep. Now, a full night's rest, progress measured in hours of uninterrupted sleep. "What are we doing today?" Emma asked, more animated than she had been since Mason's return. "Well, I have a meeting this morning with a lawyer, Ms. Chen. She's helping us make sure you can stay with me forever." Mason kept his explanations simple but honest, believing Emma deserved truth, even in child-sized portions. "Jackson thought maybe you could visit the Children's Center at the library while I'm meeting with her. They have story time and art projects." Emma considered this, her small face serious. "Will you come back afterward?" The question, its underlying fear, squeezed Mason's heart. "Always, Emma, I promise." She studied his face for a moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied with what she saw there. "Okay, can I wear my blue dress? The one with the butterflies?" Mason smiled, recognizing this small assertion of preference as another sign of Emma's emerging confidence. "Absolutely." The Children's Center at the public library was bright and welcoming, with colorful murals on the walls and child-sized furniture arranged in cozy reading nooks. The children's librarian, Ms. Patel, greeted them warmly, her kind eyes taking in Emma's hesitant posture and the protective way Mason kept his hand on his daughter's shoulder. "We're reading The Paper Bag Princess today," Ms. Patel told Emma, crouching to the child's level. "And afterward, we're making our own crowns. Would you like to join us?" Emma glanced up at Mason, who nodded encouragingly. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'll be back in 2 hours, and Ms. Patel will take good care of you." "Promise you'll come back?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. Mason knelt down, meeting her eyes directly. "I promise, Emma. 2 hours, and then we'll get ice cream afterward." The mention of ice cream brought a small smile to Emma's face. She turned to Ms. Patel and nodded, allowing herself to be led toward a circle of children gathering for story time. At the edge of the group, she glanced back once more, her blue eyes seeking reassurance. Mason gave her a thumbs up and was rewarded with a tentative wave before Emma turned her attention to the book Ms. Patel was opening. The offices of Chen Legal Group occupied the 22nd floor of a downtown high-rise. The sleek decor and panoramic views a testament to Elizabeth Chen's success in family law. In her conference room, Mason found not only the attorney, but also Jackson and Dr. Grace Taylor, both already seated at the polished oak table. "Thank you all for coming," Chen began once Mason had taken his seat. "I wanted us to meet as a group because we're reaching a critical juncture in this case." She opened a leather portfolio and extracted several documents. "First, the good news. Judge Harriman has granted our emergency petition for temporary sole custody. Effective immediately, Mason has full legal and physical custody of Emma pending a formal hearing." She slid a document across the table to Mason, the official court order bearing the judge's signature. The order also includes a temporary restraining order preventing Rebecca or Diana Sanders from attempting to contact Emma without court supervision. Mason felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Emma was legally his again, protected by the full force of the law. Additionally, Chen continued, the county records office has officially rescinded the birth certificate amendment, restoring Mason as Emma's legal father. They've also opened an internal investigation into Ms. Brown's handling of the case, though that's secondary to our concerns. Dr. Taylor spoke next, her voice carrying the calm authority of her profession. "I've completed my full assessment of Emma's physical and psychological condition. While the physical neglect is concerning but treatable, I'm more worried about the emotional impact of her abandonment." She passed copies of her report to everyone at the table. "Emma shows classic signs of attachment disruption, difficulty trusting, hypervigilance, emotional withdrawal. She's also exhibiting selective mutism in certain situations, speaking only when she feels completely safe. But she's improving," Mason noted, thinking of Emma's increased willingness to speak and engage over the past few days. Dr. Taylor nodded. "Children are remarkably resilient, especially when provided with consistent care and security. Your presence is already making a significant difference, Mr. Reed. However, I would strongly recommend trauma-focused therapy once Emma has had more time to stabilize in her new environment." Jackson cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "There's another development you should all be aware of. The prescription medication Diana was giving Emma, it was clonazepam, a benzodiazepine normally prescribed for anxiety and panic disorders in adults. The doctor who prescribed it, Mercer, has a history of complaints for overprescribing controlled substances. Mason's jaw tightened. She was sedating her. Essentially, yes, Jackson confirmed. I've spoken with the medical licensing board. They're launching an investigation into Dr. Mercer's practices, particularly regarding pediatric prescriptions. Elizabeth Chen made notes, her expression grim. This strengthens our case considerably. Now, regarding Rebecca, she extracted another document from her portfolio. We've located her, Rebecca Collins, currently residing at 1437 Lakeview Drive, a property owned by Andrew Parker. The wedding is scheduled for July 30th at Silver Pines Resort, just over 2 weeks from now. Have you served her with the custody papers? Mason asked. Chen shook her head. Not yet. Given the sensitive nature of this case and the potential for Rebecca to attempt to flee or hide assets, I wanted to discuss our approach first. She leaned forward, fingers interlaced on the table. Mason, we have multiple options here. We could pursue criminal charges against Rebecca for fraud, child endangerment, and potentially conspiracy to commit identity theft. The evidence is substantial, and conviction would likely result in jail time. The room fell silent as Mason absorbed this. The thought of Rebecca in prison, the mother of his child behind bars, was difficult to reconcile with the woman he had once loved, had once planned a life with. Alternatively, Chen continued, we could focus solely on the civil aspects, securing permanent custody, child support, and potentially damages for the fraudulent alteration of legal documents. This approach might be less traumatic for Emma in the long run. What do you recommend? Mason asked. Chen considered her response carefully. From a strictly legal perspective, the evidence supports criminal charges. Rebecca's actions were deliberate, sustained, and caused demonstrable harm to a minor. However, she paused, choosing her words with precision. In my experience, these cases are never just about legal outcomes. They're about what's best for the child moving forward. Dr. Taylor nodded in agreement. Emma's already experienced significant trauma from her mother's abandonment. A highly publicized criminal case, with Rebecca potentially imprisoned, could add another layer of complexity to her healing process. Mason looked down at the custody order in his hands, thinking of Emma's face when she asked if he would come back, the tentative way she was beginning to trust again. I don't want revenge, he said finally. I want Emma to have stability, security, and the chance to heal. If Rebecca goes to prison, how do I explain that to Emma when she's older? Jackson, who had remained silent during this exchange, spoke up. There's another consideration: the wedding. If Rebecca is planning to marry Parker without disclosing Emma's existence, he deserves to know the truth, Mason finished. Not for revenge, but because he's making a life-altering decision based on a lie. Elizabeth nodded, her expression thoughtful. Then perhaps our approach should be calibrated accordingly. We serve Rebecca with the custody papers immediately, making it clear that you have irrefutable evidence of her actions. We offer to forego criminal charges if she agrees to the following conditions: full legal and physical custody to you, supervised visitation at your discretion, and full disclosure to Andrew Parker before the wedding. And if she refuses? Mason asked. Then we proceed with both civil and criminal complaints, Chen replied, her voice firm. The choice becomes hers, but the consequences are clear. Mason considered the proposal, weighing it against his own sense of justice, and more importantly, what would best serve Emma's long-term well-being. Let's do it, but I want to be present when she's served. I want to see her face when she realizes I'm alive and Emma is with me. Later that afternoon, after retrieving Emma from the library, where she proudly showed off the paper crown she had made, decorated with butterflies just like my dress, Daddy, Mason took her for the promised ice cream. They sat outside the parlor at a small wrought iron table, Emma concentrating intently on her strawberry cone with rainbow sprinkles. Did you have fun at the library? Mason asked, watching as Emma carefully caught a drip before it reached her fingers. She nodded, more relaxed than he had seen her yet. Ms. Patel said I read really well, better than most kids my age. Pride swelled in Mason's chest. Despite everything, Emma's intelligence and resilience shone through. That's wonderful, sweetheart. You've always been smart, just like your mom. The words slipped out before he could stop them. An automatic comparison from easier times. Emma paused, her cone halfway to her mouth, a shadow crossing her face. Is Mom coming back? She asked, her voice small again. Mason set his own ice cream aside, giving Emma his full attention. I don't know, Emma. Your mom, she made some choices that hurt us both. But that doesn't mean she doesn't love you. Emma considered this, her expression far too serious for a 7-year-old. Aunt Diana said Mom didn't want me anymore. That's why she left me there. The simple statement, delivered without self-pity, broke Mason's heart all over again. That's not true, Emma. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, big mistakes, because they're scared or confused. It doesn't mean they don't love their children. Are you scared sometimes? Emma asked, her perceptiveness catching Mason off guard. Yes, he admitted, deciding honesty was the best approach. I was scared when I couldn't find you. I'm scared sometimes that I won't be a good enough dad. But being scared doesn't mean we run away from the people we love. It means we try harder to protect them. Emma nodded, seemingly satisfied with this explanation. She returned to her ice cream, the moment of solemnity passing as quickly as it had arrived. Mason watched her, marveling at her capacity to process difficult truths and move forward, a resilience he hoped would carry her through the challenges still to come. The next morning dawned clear and warm, the kind of perfect summer day that seemed at odds with the confrontation ahead. Mason dressed with care, not in his military uniform, which might seem like an intentional reminder of his service, but in clean, pressed civilian clothes that conveyed respect for the serious nature of their mission. Elizabeth Chen would serve the papers personally, accompanied by Mason and a process server who would officially document the delivery. Jackson had agreed to watch Emma, taking her to the local park where a community center offered children's activities throughout the summer. Remember, the goal is notification, not confrontation, Chen reminded Mason as they drove toward Rebecca's address. We deliver the documents, state the terms clearly, and leave. This isn't the time for emotional discussions or accusations. Mason nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. I understand. This is about Emma's future, not our past. 1437 Lakeview Drive proved to be an elegant Tudor-style home set back from the street, protected by wrought iron gates and a state-of-the-art security system. Chen pressed the intercom button, and after identifying herself as an attorney with legal documents to deliver, they were buzzed through with surprising ease. The house was even more impressive up close, 3 stories of architectural perfection, with manicured grounds and a fountain bubbling peacefully in the circular driveway. This was the life Rebecca had chosen over their modest home, over her role as Emma's mother. A housekeeper answered the door, ushering them into a marble-floored foyer where they were asked to wait. Mason stood perfectly still, his military training evident in his posture. Back straight, hands clasped behind him, eyes forward. He could feel his heartbeat accelerating, but kept his breathing steady, focusing on the mission rather than the emotional undercurrents. When Rebecca finally appeared descending the grand staircase, the sight of her hit Mason with unexpected force. Her hair was different, blonde now instead of the rich brown he remembered, and she was thinner, more elegantly dressed in designer clothes that would have been impractical in their previous life. But beneath these surface changes, she was still recognizably the woman he had married, the mother of his child. Rebecca froze halfway down the stairs, her face draining of color as she registered Mason's presence. For a long moment, she said nothing, her hand gripping the banister so tightly her knuckles whitened. Hello, Rebecca, Mason said, his voice calm and level. This isn't possible, Rebecca whispered, her composure fracturing visibly. You're dead. They told me you were dead. As you can see, they were mistaken. Mason made no move toward her, maintaining his position beside Chen. I've been back for a week now. Rebecca seemed to physically gather herself, straightening her shoulders and continuing down the stairs with forced dignity. Why are you here? How did you find me? Elizabeth Chen stepped forward, professional and crisp. Miss Collins, I'm Elizabeth Chen, attorney at law. I'm here to serve you with legal documents regarding custody of minor child Emma Reed. She extended the envelope, which Rebecca made no move to take. These documents inform you that the court has granted emergency temporary sole custody to Mason Reed, Emma's biological father. They also contain a petition for permanent sole custody and a temporary restraining order, preventing you from contacting Emma without court supervision. Rebecca's gaze darted between Chen and Mason, panic and calculation warring in her expression. This is ridiculous. You can't just appear after 2 years and take my daughter. Our daughter, Mason corrected quietly. The daughter you left with your sister 18 months ago. The daughter who was sleeping on the floor, malnourished, and being medicated to keep her quiet when I found her. A flash of guilt crossed Rebecca's face before she masked it. Diana was supposed to take care of her. I sent money. Money doesn't raise a child, Rebecca. Mason's voice remained steady, though it cost him considerable effort. Emma needed her mother, not cash payments to a neglectful guardian. Rebecca finally took the envelope, holding it as if it might burn her. You don't understand. I wasn't capable of being what she needed. When they told me you were missing, presumed dead, I broke. I couldn't function, couldn't be a single mother. So you abandoned our daughter and reinvented yourself, Mason finished for her. New name, new look, new fiancé who doesn't even know Emma exists. Rebecca's head snapped up, fear flashing in her eyes. How do you know about Andrew? The same way I know about your plans to introduce Emma as a distant relative after the wedding, if at all. Mason held her gaze, unwavering. Diana recorded your conversations. We have evidence of everything, Rebecca. The fraudulent birth certificate amendment, the prescription medication, the plans to erase Emma from your new life. The color drained from Rebecca's face once more. She sank onto the bottom step of the staircase, the envelope clutched forgotten in her hand. You don't understand, she repeated, but the words lacked conviction. Elizabeth Chen spoke again, her tone professional but not unkind. Ms. Collins, Mr. Reed has authorized me to inform you that he is prepared to pursue criminal charges for fraud, child endangerment, and conspiracy. However, he is willing to forego criminal prosecution if you agree to certain conditions. Rebecca looked up, a flicker of hope in her eyes. What conditions? First, you agree to full legal and physical custody being awarded to Mr. Reed with supervised visitation at his discretion. Second, you provide financial support for Emma's care, including therapy to address the trauma of her abandonment. And third, Chen paused, ensuring she had Rebecca's full attention. You disclose Emma's existence to Andrew Parker before the wedding. He deserves to know the truth about the woman he's planning to marry. Rebecca's expression crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. For a moment, Mason glimpsed the vulnerability beneath the polished exterior, the young woman he had married, scared and overwhelmed by life's demands. And if I refuse? She asked, her voice barely audible. Then we proceed with both civil and criminal complaints, Chen replied firmly. The choice is yours, Rebecca, but be aware that the evidence against you is substantial and compelling. Rebecca buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Mason watched her, the anger he had carried for days now tempered by an unexpected pang of empathy. Not forgiveness. The wounds were too fresh, the harm to Emma too severe, but recognition of human frailty, of the capacity for people to make devastating choices out of fear and desperation. How is she? Rebecca finally asked, looking up with mascara-streaked cheeks. Emma, is she okay? She's recovering, Mason answered truthfully. Physically, she'll be fine with proper nutrition and care, emotionally. He let the sentence hang, the implications clear. Rebecca nodded, accepting this assessment without argument. She asks about me? Sometimes, Mason acknowledged. She wonders why you left her, why you didn't come back. Fresh tears spilled down Rebecca's cheeks. I never meant to hurt her. I thought Diana would take care of her properly. I don't know what I thought, that I could start over, be someone else, someone who wasn't failing at everything. Mason said nothing, recognizing that whatever justifications Rebecca offered would be inadequate against the reality of Emma's suffering. After a long moment, Rebecca straightened, wiping her tears with a trembling hand. I need time to think about the conditions, to figure out how to tell Andrew. Elizabeth Chen nodded briskly. You have 48 hours to respond formally through legal counsel. After that, we proceed with all available legal remedies. She handed Rebecca a business card. My contact information. I suggest you engage an attorney immediately. As they turned to leave, Rebecca called out, Mason. He paused, looking back at the woman who had once been the center of his world, now a stranger in a house he had never seen. For what it's worth, she said softly, I am sorry. Not that it matters now. Mason held her gaze for a long moment. It matters to Emma, he finally replied. Make this right for her, Rebecca. Not for me, not for yourself, for our daughter. With that, he followed Chen out the door, leaving Rebecca alone on the staircase, the legal documents that would shape her future clutched in her shaking hands. In the car, Mason sat in silence, processing the encounter. He had imagined this moment for days, confronting Rebecca, demanding answers, perhaps even finding some satisfaction in her distress. Instead, he felt hollow, drained by the reality of seeing what had become of the woman he had once loved, the mother of his child. You handled that well, Chen observed, breaking the silence. Many clients in your position would have been unable to maintain such composure. Mason shrugged slightly. Military training, focus on the mission, control the variables you can, accept the ones you can't. And what's the mission now? Chen asked, her tone genuinely curious. The same as it's been since I got back, Mason replied without hesitation, giving Emma the stability and security she deserves. Everything else is secondary. Chen nodded approvingly. For what it's worth, I believe Rebecca will accept the conditions. The alternative is simply too destructive to the life she's trying to build. Mason wasn't so certain. The Rebecca he had known would have fought tooth and nail for what she wanted. But perhaps that Rebecca no longer existed, replaced by a woman willing to abandon her child for a chance at a different life. We'll see, was all he said, turning his thoughts to Emma, waiting at the park with Jackson, blissfully unaware of the legal and emotional battles being waged on her behalf. The days following the confrontation with Rebecca passed in a strange limbo of waiting and forward movement. Mason continued the process of rebuilding Emma's trust while simultaneously preparing for all possible outcomes of the legal proceedings. Elizabeth Chen had located a small rental house in a quiet neighborhood not far from the elementary school that Emma would attend in the fall. With Jackson's help, Mason secured the lease, grateful for the privacy and stability it would provide compared to the temporary arrangement at Jackson's apartment. The house was modest but comfortable. 3 bedrooms, a small backyard with a maple tree, perfect for a swing, and a kitchen with a breakfast nook where Emma could do homework while Mason prepared meals. It wasn't their old home, but it had potential to become something just as meaningful. A fresh start. Moving day arrived with little fanfare. Their possessions were few, some clothing for Emma, the items Mason had retrieved from storage, and a small collection of toys and books purchased over the past week. The Spartan nature of their belongings made the house seem cavernous, echoing with possibility rather than memories. This is our new home? Emma asked, standing in the center of the empty living room, whisper clutched to her chest. It is, Mason confirmed. What do you think? Emma considered the question with her typical seriousness. It's bigger than Aunt Diana's. Much bigger, Mason agreed. And it's all ours. You even get to pick the color for your bedroom. Emma's eyes widened slightly at this unexpected agency. Any color? Any color at all, Mason promised. We can go to the hardware store tomorrow and look at paint samples. A small smile spread across Emma's face. Not the cautious, fleeting expression of recent days, but something more genuine. Can it be purple like my old room? The question caught Mason off guard. It was the first time Emma had voluntarily referenced their previous home, the life before everything fractured. Absolutely purple it is. As they began the process of settling in, arranging the few belongings they had in ways that made the house feel more like home, Mason's phone buzzed with a text from Elizabeth Chen. Call me. News about Rebecca. Mason waited until Emma was absorbed in arranging her books on a shelf in her new room before stepping onto the back porch to make the call. Rebecca has responded to our conditions, Chen informed him without preamble. She's agreed to all terms, including full custody and disclosure to Parker. Mason leaned against the porch railing, surprised despite himself. That was faster than expected. Indeed. Chen's voice held a note of satisfaction. Her attorney contacted me this morning. They're not contesting anything, just requesting that any supervised visitation be delayed for at least 6 months to allow Emma time to stabilize. That's reasonable, Mason agreed, thinking of Dr. Taylor's assessment of Emma's emotional state. What about Parker? Has she told him? According to her attorney, yes. Apparently it didn't go well. Chen's tone was matter-of-fact, without a hint of schadenfreude. The wedding has been postponed indefinitely. Mason absorbed this information, feeling no triumph at Rebecca's apparent downfall. There was only relief that one battle, at least, would not need to be fought. There's one more thing, Chen added. Rebecca has written a letter for Emma. Her attorney delivered it this morning. I can have it couriered to you, or you can pick it up at my office. Mason hesitated, weighing the potential impact of such a letter on Emma's fragile emotional state. What does it say? I don't know, Chen admitted. It's sealed, addressed only to Emma. Legally, as her father with full custody, you have the right to read it first, or even withhold it if you believe it would be harmful. Mason thought of the birthday card in the storage unit, never sent but carefully preserved, of the voice recorder with Rebecca's bedtime story, of Emma asking why her mother hadn't come back for her. I'll pick it up tomorrow, he decided, but I won't read it. That's between Rebecca and Emma. After ending the call, Mason remained on the porch, watching the late afternoon sunlight filter through the leaves of the maple tree. The legal battle was over before it had truly begun. A victory by any objective measure. Emma was his, legally and completely. Rebecca had conceded without a fight, accepting the consequences of her choices. Yet victory felt hollow, tinged with the knowledge that whatever happened next, Emma would always carry the scars of abandonment. The best Mason could offer was healing, stability, and the unwavering certainty that he would never leave her again. Daddy, Emma's voice called from inside the house. Can we put up my drawings in my room? Of course we can, Mason replied, turning away from his thoughts to focus on the present, on his daughter, on their new home, on the life they were beginning to rebuild together. The future would arrive soon enough, with all its complications and challenges. For now, there were walls to decorate, a purple bedroom to paint, and a 7-year-old girl learning to trust again, one small step at a time. 3 days after moving into their new home, Mason took Emma to Silver Pines Resort. The decision hadn't come easily, but after careful consideration and a long discussion with Dr. Taylor, he'd concluded that Emma needed closure, not a confrontation with her mother, but a glimpse of the reality Rebecca had chosen over her. Where are we going? Emma asked from the back seat, Whisper sitting beside her in a seatbelt of his own, an arrangement that had made her giggle for the first time since Mason's return. Just for a drive, Mason replied, meeting her eyes in the rearview mirror. There's a pretty place in the mountains I thought you might like to see. Silver Pines Resort sat nestled among towering evergreens, a sprawling complex of rustic, elegant buildings centered around a crystal-clear mountain lake. In any other circumstances, it would have been a perfect destination for a family vacation. Today, it served a different purpose. Mason parked in the visitor's lot, far enough from the main building to remain inconspicuous, but with a clear view of the chapel where, according to the information Jackson had gathered, Rebecca and Andrew Parker had planned to exchange vows in less than 2 weeks. It's pretty here, Emma observed as they walked along a winding path that skirted the edge of the resort property, like a fairy tale castle in the woods. It is pretty, Mason agreed, holding her small hand in his. They found a bench overlooking the lake, positioned perfectly to see without being seen. Mason sat down, lifting Emma to sit beside him. Do you know why we came here today, Emma? She shook her head, her attention captured by a family of ducks gliding across the water's surface. Your mom was planning to get married here, Mason said gently, to a man named Andrew. Emma's head snapped around, her eyes wide with surprise. Married? But she was already married to you. The innocent confusion in her voice made Mason's heart ache. Not anymore, sweetheart. When people think someone isn't coming back, like when I was away for so long, sometimes they decide to start a new life. Emma frowned, processing this information with the deliberate thoughtfulness that characterized her approach to difficult concepts. Is that why she left me with Aunt Diana? Because she wanted a new life without me? The directness of the question caught Mason off guard, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Emma had always been perceptive, even before circumstances had forced her to become hyper-aware of adult emotions and intentions. I think, Mason began carefully, that your mom was scared and confused. Sometimes when grown-ups are scared, they make choices that hurt the people they love, even when they don't mean to. Emma considered this, her small face solemn. Did she tell the man about me? She did, just recently, Mason confirmed. She had to tell him the truth, that she has a wonderful daughter named Emma. And did he still want to marry her? Mason hesitated, uncertain how much to share. I think they're taking some time to figure things out. Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense to her. Because she lied. Lying breaks trust, and you can't marry someone you don't trust. She recited the words with the cadence of a lesson learned, perhaps from Mrs. Henderson or another teacher who had tried to instill moral principles. That's very wise, Emma, Mason said, impressed by her insight. They sat in silence for a while, watching the ducks, the gentle ripples on the lake's surface, the occasional guests strolling along the manicured paths of the resort. Mason wondered if Rebecca was there now, somewhere in one of those elegant buildings, contemplating the ruins of the new life she had tried to build. I have something for you, Mason said finally, reaching into his jacket pocket. It's a letter from your mom. Emma stared at the envelope he held out, making no move to take it. What does it say? I don't know, Mason admitted. I didn't read it. It's just for you. Emma reached out slowly, taking the envelope with uncharacteristic hesitation. She turned it over in her hands, examining the neat handwriting that spelled out her name. Will you read it to me? She asked, her voice small. Mason was surprised by the request but nodded. If that's what you want. Emma handed the letter back to him, then leaned against his side as if seeking physical reassurance before confronting her mother's words. Mason opened the envelope carefully, unfolded the pale blue stationery inside, and began to read. My dearest Emma, the letter began. By the time you read this, your father will have told you that I'm not coming back to live with you. This must be confusing and painful, and for that, I am truly sorry. I want you to know that leaving you was never about you. It was about me, my fears, my weaknesses, my inability to be the mother you deserve. When I thought your father wasn't coming home, something broke inside me. I couldn't face raising you alone, couldn't face the reminders of what we had lost. This doesn't excuse what I did. Nothing could. But I hope someday when you're older, you might understand that people can make terrible mistakes out of fear and still love their children with all their hearts. Your father is a good man, Emma, strong in ways I never was. He will give you the stability and love I couldn't provide. Trust him. Let him help you heal from the hurt I've caused. I've enclosed something that belongs to you, the key to a safe in a storage unit. Inside are photo albums, your baby blanket, and other memories from when you were little. They're yours whenever you want them. I don't ask for your forgiveness, Emma. I haven't earned it. But please know that no matter where life takes me, I will always be your mother, and I will always love you. With all my heart, Mom. Mason's voice faltered on the final words, emotion tightening his throat. Attached to the letter was a small key in a protective sleeve, labeled with the storage unit number. Emma remained silent, her body still against Mason's side. After a long moment, she asked, Is she sad? The question, so characteristic of Emma's empathy even in the face of her own pain, brought a fresh wave of emotion. Yes, sweetheart, I think she is very sad. Because of her mistake? Yes. Emma nodded slowly. I'm sad too, but not as sad as before when I didn't know where you were and Aunt Diana said Mom wasn't coming back. She looked up at Mason, her blue eyes clear and direct. Can we go home now? I want to finish putting my books on the shelf. Mason tucked the letter and key back into the envelope, then handed it to Emma. Of course we can. As they walked back to the car, Emma slipped her hand into Mason's, a gesture that had become increasingly natural over the past days. Looking down at her small figure beside him, Mason felt a surge of fierce protectiveness, tempered by immense gratitude that, despite everything, Emma still had the capacity to heal, to move forward. The confrontation he had anticipated, Emma's tears, her anger, her confusion, had not materialized. Instead, there was this quiet acceptance, this matter-of-fact processing of painful truths. Children, Mason was learning, often had an uncanny ability to cut through adult complexities to the heart of what mattered. And what mattered to Emma, it seemed, was no longer the mother who had left, but the father who had returned, the home they were building together, the books waiting to be arranged on her shelf. The wedding that had been scheduled for July 30th never took place. Jackson, with his network of contacts, reported that Andrew Parker had left for an extended business trip to Europe, while Rebecca had moved out of the Tudor mansion and into a smaller condominium across town. The fairy tale romance, built on the foundation of Rebecca's reinvented self, had crumbled under the weight of revealed truths. Mason felt no satisfaction in this knowledge, only a wistful sadness for what might have been, for the family they had once dreamed of being. Life in the new house quickly settled into comfortable routines. Mason found work as a security consultant for a local firm, his military expertise and engineering background making him a valuable asset. The position offered flexible hours, allowing him to be home when Emma finished her day at the summer program they had enrolled her in, a gentle reintroduction to social interaction with children her age. Emma's bedroom was painted a soft lavender, not quite the deep purple of her old room, but a compromise she had chosen herself, declaring it more grown up. On the walls, Mason hung framed drawings she had created, photographs from the albums they had retrieved from the storage unit, and a small American flag that reminded her, she said, of "When you were a soldier, Daddy." Dr. Taylor recommended a child therapist specializing in attachment disorders and trauma, a gentle woman named Dr. Rosales who used art and play therapy to help Emma process her experiences. Twice a week, Emma would sit in Dr. Rosales' sunlit office, creating elaborate scenes with dolls and toy figures, drawing pictures that gradually evolved from dark, confined spaces to open landscapes filled with color. "She's making remarkable progress," Dr. Rosales reported during one of their parent consultations. Children who have experienced abandonment often develop a belief that they are fundamentally unlovable, that there must be something wrong with them to make a parent leave. Emma is beginning to understand that her mother's choices were not her fault. "And the nightmares?" Mason asked. Though less frequent, Emma still occasionally woke in the night, calling out for him in panic. "They should continue to decrease with time and continued stability," Dr. Rosales assured him. "The most important factor in Emma's recovery is your consistent presence. Every time you respond when she calls, every time you show up when you say you will, you're rebuilding her sense of security." Mason took this responsibility to heart, structuring his life around Emma's needs without becoming overprotective. He was there every morning to make breakfast, every afternoon when she returned from her program, every evening to read bedtime stories. When work occasionally required late hours, he would call Emma at precise intervals, keeping his promises down to the minute. Slowly, the shadows in Emma's eyes began to recede. Her smiles came more readily, her laughter less guarded. She made a friend at the summer program, a quiet girl named Lily who shared her love of books and drawing. She began to speak about the future, about starting second grade in the fall, about learning to ride a bike without training wheels, about the possibility of getting a pet fish. These small victories, unremarkable in most children's lives, felt monumental to Mason, each one a step away from the trauma of the past and toward a more secure future. 4 weeks after moving into the new house, as July gave way to August, Mason received a call from Elizabeth Chen. "The court has made its final ruling," she informed him. "Permanent sole legal and physical custody has been awarded to you, with provisions for supervised visitation by Rebecca at your discretion, starting no earlier than January of next year." Mason had expected this outcome, given Rebecca's lack of contest, but the official confirmation still brought a profound sense of relief. Emma was his, legally and completely. No one could take her away again. Additionally, Chen continued, Rebecca has established a trust fund for Emma's education and future needs. It's quite substantial, enough to cover college and beyond. The funds are in an irrevocable trust with you as trustee until Emma turns 25. This was unexpected. Rebecca had agreed to financial support, but a trust fund of this magnitude went far beyond legal requirements. It was perhaps her way of providing for the daughter she could not parent, ensuring Emma's future even as she removed herself from it. "There's one more thing," Chen added. "Rebecca has requested a meeting with you. Just you, not Emma. She specified that it's not about changing the custody arrangement, just closure, I suppose." Mason's initial instinct was to refuse. What could Rebecca possibly say that would matter now, after everything that had happened? But as he watched Emma through the kitchen window, carefully watering the small garden they had planted together, he reconsidered. Perhaps they both needed closure, a final conversation to put the past to rest so they could move forward separately, but at peace. I'll meet with her, he decided, but not at her place or mine, somewhere neutral. 2 days later, Mason sat at a quiet table in the back corner of a small coffee shop downtown, waiting for the woman who had once been his wife. He had chosen the location deliberately, a place neither of them had frequented during their marriage, free from the weight of shared memories. Rebecca arrived precisely on time, her appearance simpler than when he had last seen her at the Tudor mansion. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, her face bearing minimal makeup, her designer clothes replaced by jeans and a simple blouse. She looked, Mason thought, with a pang of recognition, more like the Rebecca he had married than the stranger she had become. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. Her voice was subdued, lacking the defensive edge it had carried during their confrontation. Mason nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I wanted to explain," Rebecca began, then stopped, shaking her head. "No, that's not right. I don't think I can explain, not in any way that would make sense or justify what I did. I just, I wanted you to know that I'm getting help, therapy, twice a week, trying to understand why I made the choices I did, why I was capable of abandoning my own child." She twisted her hands together on the table, a nervous gesture Mason remembered from early in their relationship. "The therapist says I have attachment issues from my own childhood, that when you were declared missing, it triggered some kind of psychological break. I couldn't face the prospect of losing someone else I loved, so I detached from everything, including Emma." Mason listened without interrupting, his expression neutral. "It's not an excuse," Rebecca continued hastily. "Just context, I guess. I'm trying to understand it myself." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "How is she? Really?" "She's resilient," Mason replied, his voice level. "She's in therapy, making progress. She has nightmares sometimes, and she still carries Whisper everywhere. But she's also making friends, drawing, reading, being a kid again." Rebecca nodded, blinking back tears. "Good, that's good." She hesitated, then asked, "Did she read my letter?" "I read it to her, at her request," Mason said. "She didn't say much afterward, just asked if you were sad." A tear slipped down Rebecca's cheek. "That sounds like Emma. Always worried about everyone else's feelings, even when she's the one hurting." She wiped the tear away with a quick, almost angry gesture. "I don't deserve her concern." "Probably not," Mason agreed, his tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "But that's who she is. Empathetic, perceptive, kind despite everything. And that's something to be grateful for, even if we don't deserve it." Rebecca nodded, accepting this assessment without argument. "Andrew and I are done," she said after a moment, changing the subject. He couldn't He couldn't understand how I could hide something so fundamental about myself, not just Emma, but my whole past life with you. "I'm sorry," Mason said, and was surprised to realize he meant it, not because he felt Rebecca deserved happiness after what she had done, but because he recognized the profound loneliness of her position, cut off from her past, her future plans in ruins, the consequences of her own actions. "Don't be," Rebecca replied with a sad smile. "It's better this way. I need to figure out who I really am before I can be with anyone else. That's what my therapist says anyway." They lapsed into silence, the atmosphere between them neither comfortable nor hostile, just a quiet acknowledgement of all that had been lost and could never be regained. "I've accepted a job in Seattle," Rebecca said finally. "Fresh start for real this time. No fake names, no hiding from the past, just moving forward, trying to be better." Mason nodded, understanding the need for distance, geographical as well as emotional. "When do you leave?" "Next week." Rebecca hesitated, then asked the question Mason had been expecting since she arrived. "Do you think, someday, Emma might be willing to see me? Not now, I know it's too soon, but maybe in the future?" Mason considered his response carefully, aware of the weight it carried. That will be up to Emma when she's ready. Dr. Taylor says she needs time to heal, to feel secure again. The supervised visitation option will be there if she decides she wants it. Rebecca accepted this with a small nod. Fair enough. She reached into her purse and withdrew a small, wrapped package. I got this for her birthday next month. Would you give it to her for me? It's just a book, one she used to love when she was little. Mason took the package, noting the care with which it had been wrapped. Colorful paper with butterflies. A perfect match for Emma's favorite dress. I'll give it to her, he promised. As they prepared to leave, Rebecca looked at Mason directly for the first time since sitting down. I loved you, you know. Both of you. It wasn't a lie, not in the beginning. Mason met her gaze steadily. I know. We loved you too. The simple acknowledgement seemed to give Rebecca a measure of peace. She nodded once, decisively, then turned and walked away, out of the coffee shop and effectively out of their lives. Mason remained seated for a few minutes, processing the conversation. There was no sense of triumph in watching Rebecca leave, no vindication in her evident remorse and loneliness, only a quiet acceptance that some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt, and that sometimes the only path forward was to build new ones elsewhere. Emma's 8th birthday arrived on a perfect late August day, the kind of crystalline summer perfection that seemed designed for celebration. Mason had planned a small party in their backyard. Just Emma, her friend Lily, Mrs. Henderson, Jackson, and Dr. Taylor, all gathered around a picnic table decorated with purple streamers and butterfly-shaped balloons. The cake, which Mason had baked himself following a tutorial video with painstaking precision, was slightly lopsided but enthusiastically frosted in Emma's favorite colors. 8 candles stood ready to be lit when the time came. Can I open my presents now? Emma asked, practically vibrating with excitement after they had finished lunch. A selection of her favorite foods, from peanut butter and jelly sandwiches cut into star shapes to fresh strawberries with whipped cream. Cake first, then presents, Mason reminded her, smiling at her impatience. So different from the cautious, withdrawn child he had found under Diana's table just 2 months earlier. As Mason lit the candles, the small gathering sang Happy Birthday, their voices harmonizing in the warm afternoon air. Emma closed her eyes tightly before blowing out all 8 candles in one determined breath, then opened them with a triumphant smile. Did you make a wish? Lily asked, leaning forward eagerly. Emma nodded, her expression suddenly solemn. But I can't tell or it won't come true. The cake was cut and distributed, chocolate with vanilla frosting, leaving smudges on happy faces. Then came the presents, a set of watercolor paints from Mrs. Henderson, a butterfly identification guide from Dr. Taylor, a handmade friendship bracelet from Lily, and a leather-bound journal with Emma's name embossed on the cover from Jackson. Mason's gift was a purple bicycle with a white basket, training wheels still attached, but removable when Emma was ready. Her eyes widened at the sight of it, wheeled in from the garage with a flourish. My very own bike, she exclaimed, running her small hands over the handlebars with reverence. Can we practice riding it today? Absolutely, Mason promised, after the party. When the other presents had been opened and exclaimed over, Mason brought out one more package, the one Rebecca had left with him at the coffee shop. This is from your mom, he said quietly, watching Emma's reaction carefully. Emma took the butterfly-wrapped package with a thoughtful expression. She opened it slowly, methodically, preserving the paper rather than tearing it in excitement, as she had with her other gifts. Inside was a well-worn copy of The Velveteen Rabbit, its cover slightly faded from years of handling. This was my favorite, Emma said softly, running her fingers over the illustrations. Mom used to read it to me every night before bed. We had to read the part about becoming real twice because I loved it so much. She opened the book to find an inscription on the inside cover, written in Rebecca's neat handwriting. To Emma, may you always know how loved you are, how real you've always been. Happy 8th birthday. Love, Mom. Emma studied the words for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she carefully closed the book, set it aside with her other presents, and looked up at Mason with clear eyes. Can we have more cake, Daddy? And then maybe you can teach me to ride my new bike? Mason recognized the deflection for what it was, Emma's way of processing emotions she wasn't yet ready to face directly. Of course, sweetheart. As much cake as you want, and then bike riding until the sun goes down. Later, after the guests had departed and the sun hung low in the western sky, casting long golden shadows across their backyard, Mason stood holding the back of Emma's bike seat as she pedaled uncertainly along the sidewalk. "Don't let go, Daddy," she called over her shoulder, her voice tinged with both excitement and fear. "I won't," Mason assured her, jogging alongside as she gained confidence with each revolution of the pedals. "I'm right here." They continued up and down the sidewalk, Emma's initial wobbling gradually stabilizing into a more confident rhythm. After several successful passes, she called out, "I think I'm ready, Daddy. You can let go now." "Are you sure?" Mason asked, still holding the seat steady. Emma nodded firmly, her face set with determination. "I'm sure. I can do it." Mason loosened his grip gradually, still keeping his hand hovering just above the seat, ready to grab it if Emma faltered. But she didn't. Her legs pumped steadily, her balance held true, and she rode, wobbly but triumphant, under her own power for the first time. "I'm doing it!" she shouted, joy radiating from her like sunlight. "Daddy, look, I'm riding by myself." "You're amazing, Emma," Mason called after her, his heart so full it threatened to overflow. This was what recovery looked like. Not the absence of past wounds, but the courage to move forward despite them. To trust again, to try again, to celebrate small victories with unrestrained joy. As the twilight deepened around them, painting the world in shades of purple and gold, Mason watched his daughter circle back toward him, her face alight with pride and newfound confidence. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and there would be many as Emma continued to process her mother's abandonment and rebuild her sense of security, they would face them together, one pedal stroke at a time. 730 days away had cost them both dearly. But standing in the gathering dusk, watching Emma master this small but significant milestone, Mason knew with absolute certainty that the days ahead, however many they might be granted, would be treasured, protected, and filled with the quiet miracle of ordinary love. The kind of love that stays, that returns, that heals even the deepest wounds. The kind of love that makes you real.